I wanted to just get you started thinking about what it means to become the person you are today, what it means to have become the leader that you are today. How did it happen? And my guess is that the way you became the person you are today wasn't solely due to the schools you attended or the colleges you went to or the books you've read, as important as all those things are. One of the reasons that you are who you are today is that somebody somewhere, and if you're lucky, more than one somebody, paid attention to you as a whole person. You know, your mind, you know, your body, your presence, helping you understand how to carry yourself, how to use this wonderful instrument that we have. Your emotions, you know, how to build good relationships with people, how to deal with conflict, and your spirit. Now, what do I mean by that? When we talk about leadership, what do I mean by that? Now, for some of you, that might mean religion, and that's fine. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about leadership and becoming the best leader you can be, and spirit, I'm talking about values. I'm talking about beliefs. I'm talking about that line in the sand that you will not cross no matter what. Now, as I look around to the many people that I've worked with over the last, 10 or 15 years, I'm worried. I'm really worried that the pressures are pushing people to cross that line, their own line, too often and too far. I see it. In the bankers and, the leaders of businesses and even some of the leaders of education that I've encountered over the last 10 or so years. The kinds of pressure that we're under can cause us to kind of move up to the line and move back and move up to the line and move back. And, before long, you've got a toe over and it doesn't feel that bad and the consequences aren't that bad. So you take a step. And it's not because we're evil or, bad actors or horrible people. There's something going on in this world that we live in that is causing us to lose sight of who we are. And we need to catch that. If we're going to maneuver into a future that is better than today in our schools, in our communities, in our states and our nation and our world, then each one of us needs to step back a little bit and look at ourselves as whole people, bringing our entire selves to this act of leadership, and in particular bringing our spirit to the act of leadership, our values, our beliefs, having the courage to step up and step out, having the courage to withstand the pressure and say no, or say yes, or say go. And I know that we're not doing it as much as we should. Now, it's common sense. What I'm talking about today, I'm going to talk to you about emotional intelligence. I'm going to talk to you about resonant leadership. I'm going to talk to you about bringing your whole self to this act of leadership. It is common sense. So what is the problem here? Why are there so few good leaders in our institutions? Now, I really, truly, I'm sad to say that many of us, and I will stand up and say that at times in my life, I have been part of this problem. Many of us are only average leaders. Now, we may be doing our jobs really well, whatever our jobs are, we're meeting our objectives and blah, 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 but we're not leading. So we're not leaving our institutions in a place that's better than we found them. We might have driven to goals and objectives and results for a short period of time and it looked great, right? But we're leaving havoc in our wake. Average leaders who meet short-term goals and forget about the long-term. There are too many. So why is this? I want to talk to you about some of the myths that we've grown up with in the United States and frankly in a lot of parts of the Western world and beyond about leadership that don't serve us well. Now, I'll preface this by saying I was lucky enough to be asked to write a textbook on management. And I say lucky enough because I'm actually done with it and I enjoyed the process. But when they first said, hey, Annie, do you want to write a textbook? I said, actually, no, I'd rather jump off a cliff. Thanks. It sounds miserable, but it wasn't. I enjoyed it. I looked at all of the literature in management. I literally, got this great team together, and we looked at it all from over 100 years ago till now. And some of the beliefs that we hold about management are based in research, if you can call it that came out of studies done over 100 years ago in coal mines. And they just simply don't apply. So let's look at a couple of these myths. First, this one you're going to be familiar with. Smart is good enough. IQ is it. What we know from the studies of leadership, right? Leadership, not getting a job done, but leadership, is that in fact, competencies related to emotional intelligence make the difference. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Let me introduce you to the second one. Your mood doesn't matter. Emotions don't matter. You should park them at the door and go in with a happy face and everything's going to be great. Well, guess what? We humans are amazingly smart when it comes to picking up the emotions of other human beings. And you might be smiling and looking like you're having a good time. You may be even having a good time, but people are going to sense that stress and that anxiety, and they're going to sense when you don't like them. And what's the problem with that? The problem is it contributes to a climate, which, as you'll see in a minute, is a huge factor in obtaining results in an institution that you are leading. Third myth that I'm going to talk about, that we're tough and resilient, and we can take anything that's thrown our way. Well, guess what? We can. We're strong. We don't take these jobs on unless we really have the passion and, quite frankly, strength. Physical strength sometimes, psychological strength always. Now let me talk a little bit about this physical strength thing. Do you have to be physically strong in order to be a leader? There's a lot of literature out there that says yes. There's all this stuff like, you only sleep 4 hours a day and blah, blah, blah. Frankly, that research is flawed. Most people, if you don't get 7 or 8 hours of sleep pretty regularly, you start to become psychotic. It's true. It's really true. On a more serious note, I want to talk about a man I knew. His name was David Smith. And Dave was an educator, and he worked with me for many years at Penn and then in my consulting company. And it's actually only a year and a half ago, in a period of 3 weeks, Dave went from perfectly healthy, hiking and doing biking and doing all the things he loves to do, to paralyzed from here down and unable to move. He was struck by a very rare form of cancer, very, very rare form of cancer that they couldn't diagnose for a couple of months, and when they did, they tried everything, but Dave died less than 6 months later. And I'm very emotional when I think about him. He's a very, very dear friend. But what has this got to do with the physical aspect of leadership, the strength? I'll tell you what it has to do with it. During those 4 or 5 months, between the period the time when Dave became paralyzed and when he died, he inspired thousands of people around the world. He reached out to literally everyone he knew, and it went viral, and thousands of people heard his message about finding the strength within, finding the passion within, and finding your heart, your core, and making sure that you're living it every single day, because you don't know when those days will end. So no, it doesn't necessarily have to do with physical strength, but for most of us, if we don't find time and learn how to practice renewal every day of our lives, we will lose the capacity that we innately have and that we've nurtured our entire lives. So let me look at each one of these. This is research, by the way. I'm getting a little bit into the academic side of it. And I say we, and it's myself and Richard Boyatzis and colleagues all over the world, have studied leadership competencies now for about 30 or 40 years. I haven't been doing it that long. thankfully, because that would make me very, very old. But I joined the team back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we've studied people in every single type of company or institution, from banking to hospitals to schools to administrations, to you name it. And the research is very solid at this point. When you talk about leadership competencies, there are some on the cognitive side that make a big difference. Pattern recognition is one of them. In this world that is so new and changing so fast, we need to be able to recognize patterns in seemingly unrelated data, make sense of it, translate it into something that is useful and kind of accessible to people with language and through other means, that vision thing, and get people directed toward it. That's really important. What makes more of a difference in leadership are the competencies related to emotional intelligence. So what are they? We look at them as being within 4 quadrants or 4 circles here. Competencies related to self-awareness, that's the foundation of good leadership. Let me go back to this for a second. Self-awareness, what is it? It's the ability to understand yourself, your values, your beliefs, the core of who you are, your identity, your biases, all of that. And also your emotions, you know? Understanding how your emotions impact you and the people around you. When you're stressed, what happens to you physically, psychologically? What do you do? You know, when you're excited and optimistic, what does it do for you? How does that impact other people? Self-awareness is the foundation for good leadership. And this is why we say professional development is impossible without personal growth. You hear me? Professional development is not possible without personal growth. So when you encounter those people in your teams and you look, it's like, what is up with this person? 9/10 of the time, they haven't done the deep work that helps them develop self-awareness so that they understand how they're impacting others. And then they can manage themselves, which is the second circle there, self-management. Competencies related to self-management. Now, one of them is obviously emotional self-control. And when we think about it, we think, okay, no temper tantrums and all that kind of stuff. And most of us have, you know, been socialized to the point that we don't do that at work. You know, we're not ranting and raving and throwing shoes. Although I have encountered these people. It's astounding. You really see them every once in a while. But most of us don't do that. On the other hand, self-management is a lot more subtle. It's managing your negative emotions so that they challenge you and others toward achievement of goals, okay? So, you know, when you're feeling stressed, tamping it down so it is at a level that is useful and usable as opposed to out of control, for example. When you're angry, knowing how to hold on to that anger and either take care of it internally if it's not appropriate to use it with other people, or figure out a way to use it for the collective good. Negative emotions are not always bad. If you're afraid, if you're really afraid, you need to look at that and try to determine whether it's a legitimate fear. And if it is, you need to do something about it. If you're angry, you know, if your sense of justice has been somehow touched in a negative way, well, you know what? You may need to use that anger and let it fuel you and other people. But you also need to manage positive emotions. Positive emotions are a powerful driver of your own and others' behavior. Optimism, hope, idealism, the sense that the future will be better than today. That's what great leaders do. Social awareness, in your jobs, and I just take my hat off to you, I salute every person in this room, because social awareness is one of the things that is absolutely essential in jobs like yours. Learning to understand the needs and desires of other people and acting on those needs and desires for the good of the group. And then you ask yourself, what is the group? Is it your classroom, if you're teaching? Is it your school? Is it your district? Is it your community? Is it your state? Is it that group of parents that's really vocal and loud? What's the group? Knowing how to maneuver in your world, I take my hat off to you, because it's really complicated. You know, you've got this 5-year-old girl who enters kindergarten having seen more than any child should ever see in their entire childhood or even lifetime. And you see that spark of brilliance in this child, and you're wondering, how am I going to lead that child? You know, or that group of teachers who are feeling isolated in their classrooms, and you need to pull them together. What are you going to do? How are you going to read what they need in a way that will inspire them to spend the extra time it takes to come together as a group? Or your staff, how do you make them feel like, you know, we're a team here, we're all a team? And in your communities, the kind of negativity that comes at some of you is just unthinkable, really. Sometimes you're the person or the group that everyone loves to hate. And that's a really hard place to be. And social awareness, learning how to read the political environment, and I mean the social political environment, is key to success in any job, and I think in particular yours. And then managing relationships. All of these things that I've just talked to add up to the ability to manage relationships.